The gunshot cracked through the mountain air like thunder, and Josephine Porter felt the bullet slice through the fabric of her cloak as she threw herself behind a snow-covered boulder, her lungs burning from the thin air and sheer terror that had kept her running for 3 days straight. She pressed her trembling hands against the frozen stone, her breath coming in ragged gasps that sent white clouds into the December morning. Behind her she could hear the horses, the shouting voices of the men her husband had sent to drag her back to Salt Lake City, back to the gilded prison where Marcus Porter ruled with an iron fist disguised as gentility, back to the bruises hidden under silk dresses and the fear that lived in her bones. "I would rather die in the cold than go back," she whispered to herself, the words becoming a prayer as she stumbled forward through the deep snow. Her boots were meant for parlors, not mountain passes, and her feet had gone numb hours ago. The December wind of 1878 cut through her traveling dress like knives, and she knew that if the men did not catch her, the elements would claim her instead. But she would not go back. She could not. Another shot rang out, closer this time, and Josephine forced her exhausted body to move. The forest ahead was thick with pine and juniper, the branches heavy with snow. If she could just reach the trees, perhaps she could lose them in the wilderness. Perhaps the cold would be kinder than Marcus's rage. She had made it perhaps 20 yards when her foot caught on something buried beneath the snow. She went down hard, her hands plunging into the icy powder, and a cry of despair tore from her throat. This was it. This was where it would end. She tried to push herself up, but her strength was gone, drained by days of running, of hiding, of surviving on nothing but melted snow and the few pieces of bread she had stolen from a ranch kitchen 2 nights ago. The voices were getting closer. She could make out words now. "She cannot have gone far. The boss wants her alive, remember that." Josephine closed her eyes, preparing for rough hands to seize her, when a different sound cut through the air. It was low and commanding, a voice that seemed to come from the mountain itself. "The lady looks like she does not want to be found." Josephine's eyes snapped open. Standing between her and her pursuers was a man who seemed carved from the wilderness itself. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the pale winter sun. His buckskin jacket stretched across a chest thick with muscle, and his legs, planted firmly in the snow, looked strong enough to support the weight of the mountain behind him. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, partially covered by a fur hat, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that captured her attention, even from where she lay in the snow. They were a startling blue, like the sky on a clear winter day, and they held a steadiness that spoke of a man who feared nothing. In his gloved hands he held a rifle, pointed casually but deliberately at the 3 men who had been pursuing her. "This is none of your concern, mountain man," one of the men said. Josephine recognized him as Thomas Reed, one of Marcus's most loyal employees. "The woman is my employer's wife. She is not well in the head and has wandered off. We are simply returning her to her husband's care." The mountain man did not lower his rifle. "Funny thing about that story. I have been tracking a mountain lion through these parts for 2 days, and I have seen this woman's tracks. She has been moving with purpose, not wandering, and she has been running from something, judging by the pattern." His voice was deep and calm, with an edge of steel beneath the words. "Now, I may be just a simple man who lives in these mountains, but I know the difference between someone who is lost and someone who is fleeing." "I said this is none of your concern," Thomas Reed repeated, his hand moving toward the pistol at his hip. The mountain man's rifle shifted almost imperceptibly, now aimed directly at Reed's chest. "And I am making it my concern. The way I see it, you are on open territory, not Porterland, and out here, a man or a woman has the right to choose their own path." Josephine found the strength to push herself to her knees, then to her feet, though she swayed dangerously. "Please," she said, her voice hoarse from the cold and from days of barely speaking. "Please do not let them take me back. I would rather die out here in this cold than return to that house." The mountain man's jaw tightened beneath his beard, though he did not take his eyes off the 3 men. "You heard the lady. She is not going anywhere with you." "Marcus Porter will not take kindly to this interference," Reed said, his face flushing with anger. "He is a powerful man in Utah territory. He has connections, influence." "I do not care if he is friends with Brigham Young himself," the mountain man replied evenly. "Up here?" His power means nothing. Up here, it is just the mountain, the sky, and a man's own strength. And right now, my rifle says the lady stays with me." For a long moment, the two parties faced each other across the snow. Josephine held her breath, waiting for the violence to erupt, but Reed finally cursed under his breath and jerked his head at the other two men. "Porter will hear about this. He will send more men, better armed men." "Let him send whoever he wants," the mountain man said. "Tell him his wife said she would rather die in the cold than go back, and tell him that I said she will never go back again. Not while I am breathing." The three men turned their horses and rode back down the mountain trail, though Reed looked back twice, his expression promising that this was not over. Josephine watched them go, her entire body beginning to shake now that the immediate danger had passed. The adrenaline that had kept her upright drained away all at once, and she felt her knees buckle. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. The mountain man had crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, moving with a speed that belied his size. He lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. "Easy now," he said, his voice gentler than it had been moments before. "You are half frozen and completely exhausted. My cabin is not far from here. We need to get you warm before you lose any toes to frostbite." Josephine wanted to protest, to maintain some dignity, but the warmth radiating from his body was too tempting, and the darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision would not be denied. She let her head rest against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of pine smoke and leather and something wild that she could not name. Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not letting them take me." "No need for thanks," he replied, already moving through the snow with steady, sure steps. "No one should be dragged back to a place they are fleeing, not man, woman, or beast." As consciousness slipped away from her, Josephine's last coherent thought was that she had been saved by a stranger who asked nothing in return, who simply saw a person in need and acted. In her 23 years of life, mostly spent in the drawing rooms and churches of Salt Lake City, she had never encountered such uncomplicated kindness. When she opened her eyes again, warmth had returned to her body in a painful rush. She was lying on something soft, covered in what felt like a mountain of furs and blankets. A fire crackled nearby, and the air smelled of wood smoke and something savory cooking. She tried to sit up, but her body protested every movement. "Go slow," came that deep voice again. "You have been out for near about 4 hours. Your body needs time to recover." Josephine turned her head to see the mountain man sitting near the fire, stirring something in a pot hung over the flames. In the firelight, she could see his features more clearly. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 27 or 28, with weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. His face was strong and angular, all hard planes and masculine lines, and those striking blue eyes seemed to see everything. "Where am I?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "My cabin. About 5 miles north of where I found you, deeper into the mountains. No one will find you here unless I want them to." Josephine looked around the single-room structure. It was simple but well built, with thick log walls that kept out the wind. Furs and hides hung on the walls, and supplies were neatly organized on shelves. A bed, the one she was currently occupying, stood in one corner. Tools and weapons were arranged near the door. It was the home of a man who lived by his own skill and strength. "I took the liberty of removing your wet boots and stockings," he said, not looking at her. "Your feet were in bad shape. I've treated them the best I can, but you will need to stay off them for a few days." Heat flooded Josephine's cheeks, though whether from embarrassment or the returning warmth, she could not say. "That was very kind of you. I apologize for the trouble I have brought to your door." "No trouble that was not worth taking on." He ladled some of the stew into a wooden bowl and brought it over to her, along with a spoon. "You need to eat. When was the last time you had a proper meal?" Josephine accepted the bowl with shaking hands. 4 days ago, maybe 5. I'm not entirely certain anymore. The days have blurred together." She took a spoonful of the stew and nearly moaned at the taste. It was simple fare, venison and root vegetables in a rich broth, but it was the most delicious thing she had ever eaten. She forced herself to eat slowly, though her stomach screamed for her to devour it all at once. The mountain man watched her for a moment, then returned to his seat by the fire. "My name is Benjamin Davies," he said. "Ben to those who know me, which is not many. I have lived in these mountains for 6 years, trapping and hunting. Josephine, she replied between bites. Josephine Porter, though I wish I could shed that last name as easily as I shed my wedding ring 3 days ago. Ben's eyes flickered to her left hand, where a pale band of skin marked where the gold band had once sat. You left your husband. It was not a question, but Josephine answered anyway. I fled my husband. There is a difference. Leaving implies a civilized parting. What I did was escape. He hurt you. Again, not a question. Josephine set down the bowl, her appetite suddenly gone despite her hunger. Marcus Porter is a respected businessman in Salt Lake City. He owns mining interests and has invested heavily in the railroad expansion. To the outside world, he is a pillar of the community, a generous benefactor to the church, a man of impeccable character. That is not what I asked. Josephine met Ben's steady gaze and found she could not look away. Yes, she said quietly. He hurt me. Not often enough to be obvious, and never where the bruises would show in polite company. He was very careful about that. But the physical pain was not the worst of it. It was the control, the constant fear, the way he made me feel like I was slowly disappearing inside my own life. Ben's hands tightened on his knees, his knuckles going white. How long were you married to him? 2 years. We married when I was 21. My father arranged the match. He thought Marcus was a good prospect, a man who could provide well for his daughter. She laughed bitterly. I suppose he was right about the providing part. I had everything money could buy except freedom. Why did you run now? What changed? Josephine was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. He wanted to start a family. I kept delaying, making excuses because I could not bear the thought of bringing a child into that house. But 3 weeks ago he told me he was done waiting. He said that if I did not give him a son within the year, he would find other ways to ensure his legacy. She swallowed hard. That night, I heard him discussing with Thomas Reed the possibility of having me declared mentally unfit if I continued to refuse. He planned to have me committed to an asylum where I would be out of the way but could not divorce him or cause scandal. Ben stood up abruptly, his massive frame radiating barely contained fury. He walked to the window and stared out at the darkening sky. Men like that should not be allowed to draw breath, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Perhaps not, Josephine agreed. But Marcus is well connected and well protected. Going to the law would have been useless. He knows everyone in Salt Lake City, including the marshals. So I took what money I could hide away, packed the bare essentials, and left in the night. I had hoped to reach California, to disappear into one of the big cities there, but I underestimated how hard the journey would be and how quickly he would send men after me. Ben turned back to face her. You will not make it to California, not in winter, not alone. The mountain passes will be snowed in for months yet. Then I will die trying, Josephine said with more conviction than she felt, because I meant what I said out there. I would rather die in the cold than go back to him. You will do neither, Ben replied firmly. You will stay here until spring. The winter will keep Porter's men away. These mountains are unforgiving to those who do not know them, and by the time the pass is clear, we will have figured out a better plan than you wandering alone into the wilderness. Josephine stared at him. You would let me stay here? For months? But you do not even know me. I know enough. I know you are running from a man who treated you as property instead of a person. I know you have more courage than sense, which is saying something, and I know that I cannot in good conscience send you back out into the cold when I have the means to help you. He crossed his arms over his broad chest. Besides, I told those men you would never go back, and I meant it. I do not make promises I cannot keep. Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes, the first she had allowed herself to shed since she had fled. Why are you doing this? You do not know me. I could be lying about everything. Ben regarded her for a long moment. You're not lying. I have seen enough of the world to recognize truth when I hear it. As for why, well, 6 years ago, I came to these mountains to escape my own demons. I was a different man then, fresh from the war and sick of violence. These mountains gave me peace when I needed it most. Maybe it is time I returned the favor to someone else. He moved to a trunk in the corner and pulled out some clothes, which he brought over to her. These will be far too big for you, but they are clean and warm. Tomorrow, if you are feeling stronger, We can see about altering some of my spare clothes to fit you better. You cannot spend the winter in a traveling dress." Josephine accepted the bundle of wool and flannel. "I do not know how I will ever repay this kindness. I am not asking for repayment. I am offering help freely given." Ben pulled on his heavy coat and hat. "I need to check my trap lines before full dark, the door bars from the inside. Do not open it for anyone but me. I will knock 3 times, pause, then twice more. That way you will know it is safe." "You think they might come back?" "I think Marcus Porter sounds like a man who does not like to lose. Best to be cautious." He picked up his rifle and a large pack. "There's more stew in the pot and water in the bucket by the basin. Rest. You are safe here." Then he was gone, slipping out into the twilight with the easy confidence of a man completely at home in the wilderness. Josephine listened to his footsteps fade away, then carefully pushed back the furs and examined her feet. They were bandaged with clean cloth, and while they ached, the worst of the damage seemed to have been prevented by Ben's quick treatment. She stood gingerly and made her way around the cabin, learning its geography. It was a surprisingly comfortable space for a bachelor trapper. Everything had its place, and while the furnishings were rough, they were well made and sturdy. Books lined a small shelf near the bed, which surprised her. She tilted her head to read the spines: Whitman, Thoreau, Shakespeare, and several volumes on natural history and tracking. Benjamin Davies was not what she had expected when she imagined a mountain man. He was educated, thoughtful, and kind. And the way he had stood between her and danger without hesitation spoke of a core of steel beneath that quiet demeanor. As darkness fell completely, Josephine changed into the clothes Ben had provided. The shirt hung on her like a dress, and she had to roll the trouser legs up several times, but they were blessedly warm. She added more wood to the fire and settled back onto the bed, cocooned in furs. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Truly safe. When Ben returned an hour later, giving the agreed-upon knock, he found her asleep, the bowl of stew empty beside her, and a slight smile on her face that had not been there before. The next days passed in a strange, peaceful rhythm. Ben gave Josephine the bed and made himself a pallet near the fire, refusing her protests with quiet firmness. He spent his days checking traps, hunting, and gathering firewood, while Josephine rested and regained her strength. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and slowly, conversation began to flow. Ben told her about the war, about the battles he had fought in, and the things he had seen that had driven him to seek solitude. He spoke of learning to live in harmony with the mountain, of tracking animals and reading the sky, of the deep satisfaction that came from surviving by one's own skill and strength. Josephine, in turn, spoke of her childhood in Salt Lake City, of a mother who had died when she was young, and a father who saw her only as a commodity to be traded for social advancement. She talked about her love of reading, of poetry, of the dreams she had harbored of seeing the ocean someday. "I used to climb to the roof of our house at night," she said one evening, perhaps a week after her arrival. "I would look up at the stars and imagine myself anywhere but there. I would picture sailing ships and foreign cities and a life where I could make my own choices." "You still can," Ben said, whittling a piece of wood by the firelight. "Once spring comes, you can go wherever you want." "Can I?" Josephine pulled the fur blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Marcus will be looking for me. He will not simply let me go, and I have no money, no skills that would earn me a living. What I have is a love of books and the ability to pour tea properly. That does not translate well to independence." Ben set down his whittling and looked at her. "You survived 3 days alone in the mountains in winter with inadequate supplies and clothing. You escaped from a man who controlled your every movement. You chose possible death over certain misery. Those are skills, Josephine. They are survival skills, and they are worth more than you know." His words settled something inside her, some tight knot of fear that had lived in her chest for so long. She had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. As the weeks passed and December gave way to January of 1879, Josephine grew stronger. Her feet healed and she began to help with the daily tasks of living. Ben taught her how to prepare hides, how to make soap from animal fat and ashes, how to cook over an open fire. She learned to mend clothes with sinew and bone needles, to identify edible plants even in winter, to read the signs of changing weather, and she learned about the man who had saved her life. Benjamin Davies was nothing like the men she had known in Salt Lake City. There was no artifice to him, no false courtesy masking cruelty. He was direct and honest, and his strength was not used to intimidate, but to protect. When he moved, it was with the fluid grace of a natural predator, all controlled power and purpose. And when he looked at her, it was not with the possessive hunger she had seen in Marcus's eyes, but with respect and something else, something warm that made her heart beat faster. She tried not to notice the way his shirt stretched across his muscled shoulders when he chopped wood. She tried not to feel the heat that spread through her when his hand accidentally brushed hers as they worked. She tried not to imagine what it would be like to be held by those strong arms, to feel that powerful body pressed against hers. But she was only human. And Ben was beautiful in the way wild things are beautiful, raw and untamed and utterly captivating. Ben, for his part, was fighting his own battles. Josephine was unlike any woman he had ever known. She had a quick mind and a sharp wit, and once she felt safe enough to let down her guard, a sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh. She was curious about everything, asking endless questions about the mountains and the animals in his life. And she was lovely. He had known that from the first, but as the bruises faded and the fear left her eyes, her beauty became almost painful to behold. She had dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders when she unpinned it at night, and eyes the color of good whiskey, gold brown and warm. Her face was fine-boned and delicate, but there was strength in the set of her jaw and the directness of her gaze. He wanted her. God help him, he wanted her with an intensity that shocked him after so many years of solitude. But she was healing from wounds both physical and emotional, and she had come to him for safety, not for romance. So he kept his distance as best he could, and he tried not to notice the way she looked at him sometimes, with an expression that made his blood run hot. Late one evening in mid-January, a blizzard descended on the mountain with fury. The wind howled like a living thing, and snow fell so thickly that Ben could not see the tree line from the cabin window. He secured the shutters and built up the fire while Josephine prepared their evening meal. "I have never seen a storm like this," she said, ladling stew into bowls. "The wind sounds like it is trying to tear the mountain apart." "It will blow itself out by morning," Ben assured her. "The cabin is weathered worse. We are secure here." They ate in comfortable silence, but as the storm intensified, the temperature inside the cabin began to drop despite the roaring fire. Ben piled more wood on, but the fierce wind seemed to suck the heat away through every tiny gap in the walls. "Come closer to the fire," he instructed Josephine, who was wrapped in several furs but still shivering. "We need to conserve body heat." She moved her pallet nearer to his, and they huddled together by the hearth. As the hours passed and the cold deepened, Ben finally made a decision. "We need to share the furs," he said. "Body heat will keep us both warmer than trying to maintain separate spaces." Josephine looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Are you certain?" "I am certain that I do not want either of us to freeze because of propriety," he replied. "I give you my word that you are safe with me." She nodded slowly. "I know I am. I trust you, Ben." Those 4 words affected him more than any declaration of passion could have. She trusted him. After what she had endured, trust was not given lightly. They arranged the furs and blankets into a nest close to the fire, and Ben lay down on his side, opening his arms. Josephine hesitated only a moment before settling against his chest, her back to him. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling the furs over them both, and tried to ignore how perfectly she fit against him. "Better?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. "Much better," she admitted. "You are like a furnace." He felt her gradually relax against him, her shivers subsiding as his body heat enveloped her. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cocoon of furs, with Josephine in his arms, Ben felt a contentment he had not experienced in years. "Can I ask you something?" Josephine said softly after a while. Anything. "Do you ever get lonely up here, all by yourself?" Ben was quiet for a long moment. "I did not think I did. I chose this life to escape the noise and violence of the world, but I realize now that what I called peace might have been more like emptiness. I'd forgotten what it felt like to share a space with someone, to have another person to talk to care about." His arms tightened around her slightly. "You have reminded me of that." Josephine turned in his arms, shifting so she faced him. They were so close, their breaths mingled. "I've been thinking about what will happen when spring comes," she said. "About where I will go." "And what have you decided?" "That I do not want to go anywhere. That I want to stay here, with you, if you will have me." Ben's heart hammered in his chest. "Josephine, you have only been here a few weeks. You cannot make that decision yet. Once the path is clear, you will have options, possibilities. You should not limit yourself to a life in these mountains because it is safe." "That's not why I want to stay," she said, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. "I want to stay because for the first time in my life, I feel like I can breathe. Because you see me as a person, not as property or obligation. Because when I am with you, I am not afraid." She paused, gathering courage. "And because I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and brave. Ben stared at her, his blue eyes searching her face. "You cannot love me," he said, his voice strained. "You are grateful, and that is natural. But gratitude is not love." "Do you think I do not know the difference?" Josephine asked, a spark of anger in her voice. "I was married for 2 years to a man I despised. I know what it feels like to live without love. And I know that what I feel for you is real, even if it scares me, even if it is too soon, even if it makes no logical sense." "Josephine," he began, but she pressed her fingers to his lips. "Tell me you do not feel anything for me, and I will never speak of it again. Tell me I am just an obligation you took on, and I will leave as soon as spring arrives. But do not lie to me, Ben. I have had enough of lies." He caught her hand in his much larger one, holding it against his cheek. "I cannot tell you that. I cannot lie to you. The truth is that I started falling for you the moment you looked up at me from that snow and said you would rather die than go back. The truth is that these past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. The truth is that the thought of you leaving in the spring feels like someone is twisting a knife in my chest. Then why are you fighting this? Because you deserve better than a mountain hermit with blood on his hands and nightmares that wake him in the cold hours before dawn. You deserve a man who can give you a proper home, society, a normal life." Josephine shook her head. "I do not want normal. Normal is what trapped me with Marcus. Normal is what made me a prisoner in my own life. I want real, Ben. I want honest. I want someone who treats me like an equal, who makes me laugh, who trusts me with his demons the way I trust him with mine." Her eyes shone with unshed tears. "I want you." Something broke inside Ben, some wall he had built around his heart years ago. He pulled her closer until there was no space between them, and lowered his forehead to rest against hers. "I want you too," he breathed. "God help me. I want you so much it terrifies me." "Then have me," Josephine whispered. "I am not fragile. I will not break. And I am so tired of being afraid to take what I want." Ben kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that held all the tenderness he felt, but had been too afraid to express. Josephine made a soft sound and kissed him back, her hands sliding up to tangle in his long hair. The kiss deepened, becoming something hungry and desperate, two lonely souls reaching for connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ben traced his thumb across her cheek. "I cannot promise you an easy life up here. Winters are hard, and we will be alone most of the time. There are dangers, wild animals, and harsh weather. You will have to work hard just to survive. I can work hard. You've already taught me so much. And there is the matter of your husband. He will not stop looking for you. Even up here there is risk." "Then we face it together." Josephine's voice was steady. "I told you I'm not going back. Whatever comes, I would rather face it with you than face safety and comfort in a cage." Ben pulled her close again, tucking her head under his chin. "Then stay. Stay with me, and I promise you this. I will never hurt you, never control you, never make you feel less than the remarkable woman you are. I will keep you safe to the best of my ability, but I will also trust you to be strong on your own. And I will love you with everything I have, for as long as you will have me." Tears slipped down Josephine's cheeks, but they were tears of relief and joy. "That is all I have ever wanted, to be loved and trusted and seen. You already give me all of that." They held each other as the storm raged outside, finding warmth and comfort in each other's arms. And when they finally made love that night, It was with a tenderness and passion that came from two people who had found in each other exactly what they had been missing. The rest of the winter passed in a blur of domestic contentment and growing love. Ben taught Josephine to shoot, to set snares, to track animals through the snow. She proved to be a quick learner, with steady hands and a sharp eye. He also taught her to ski using the long wooden planks he had fashioned, and they would spend afternoons gliding through the silent forest, returning to the cabin with rosy cheeks and laughter. Josephine, in turn, taught Ben things he had not realized he was missing. She read to him in the evenings, her voice bringing poetry and stories to life. She organized his haphazard collection of supplies and showed him more efficient ways to preserve food. And she brought softness and joy back into a life that had become perhaps too hard, too solitary. They spoke often of the future, of what would happen when spring came. The passes would clear, and Marcus Porter would almost certainly send more men looking for his runaway wife. But Josephine refused to live in fear. "We will deal with it when it happens," she said one evening in March, as the first signs of thaw began to show. "But I'm not running any more, Ben. This is my home now, our home, and I will fight to keep it." Ben looked at the woman who had entered his life as a terrified refugee and had become his partner in every sense of the word. She was stronger now, her body lean and capable from the physical work of mountain living. Her hands, once soft and decorative, were now calloused and skilled, and her eyes held a confidence and determination that made his chest swell with pride. "If they come, we will face them together," he agreed. "But I want you to promise me something. If things go badly, if it looks like they will take you by force, I want you to run. Head north, deeper into the mountains. There is a Shoshone camp about 2 days from here. The chief, Standing Bear, is a friend. Tell him you are under my protection, and he will keep you safe until I can come for you." "Ben, I will not leave you to face them alone." "You will if I say so," he replied firmly. "I can handle Marcus Porter's men. What I cannot handle is the thought of them dragging you back to Salt Lake City while I am unable to stop them. Promise me, Josephine." She wanted to argue, but she saw the fear beneath his determination. "I promise. But you had better come for me, Benjamin Davies, or I will come back down this mountain and raise hell." He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "I will always come for you." April brought the true thaw, and with it, a tension that hung over the cabin like a storm cloud. Both Ben and Josephine knew that the confrontation with Marcus Porter was coming. The only question was when. The answer came on a clear morning in late April. Ben was outside splitting wood when he heard the horses. He set down the axe and reached for the rifle leaning against the cabin wall, his movements calm and controlled even as his heart rate spiked. Josephine emerged from the cabin, her own rifle in hand. They had prepared for this, had practiced their response. But preparation did not stop the cold fear that gripped her when she saw the group of riders emerging from the tree line. There were 6 men this time, all armed, and in the lead rode Marcus Porter himself. He was a handsome man in a cold, precise way, with dark hair slicked back and expensive clothing that looked absurd in the wilderness setting. His face was hard as he reined in his horse and surveyed the cabin and its 2 defenders. "Josephine," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing, "this charade has gone on long enough. You will return home with me now." "This is my home," Josephine replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. She stood beside Ben, her rifle held with confidence. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Marcus." Marcus's eyes flickered to Ben, and his lip curled in distaste. "So the rumors are true. My wife has been living in sin with a mountain savage. How utterly predictable." "Your wife," Ben said, his voice dangerously quiet, "made her choice clear months ago. She would rather die in the cold than go back to you. And I told your men that she would never go back again. That has not changed." "You have no authority here," Marcus snapped. "Josephine is my legal wife. I have every right to reclaim my property." "I am not your property," Josephine said, her voice rising. "I never was, though you treated me as such. I am a human being with my own will, and I choose to stay here with Ben." Marcus's face flushed with anger. "You have been compromised, manipulated by this man. You are not thinking clearly. But do not worry, my dear. Once I have you home, we will find a suitable treatment for your hysteria." He gestured to his men who began to dismount. "Take her. Use force if necessary." I would not do that, Ben said, raising his rifle. The click of the hammer echoed in the clearing. The first man who takes a step toward her will be the last step he ever takes. The men hesitated, eyeing the large mountain man with his steady aim and calm demeanor, but Marcus was not deterred. There is one of you and 6 of us. You cannot possibly win this fight. Maybe not, Ben agreed. But I guarantee I will take at least 3 of you with me, starting with you, Porter. And once the shooting starts, Josephine will disappear into these mountains where you will never find her. Is getting your wife back worth dying for? Marcus's hand moved toward the pistol at his waist, but a voice from behind them stopped him cold. I would not do that if I were you. Everyone turned to see 3 Shoshone warriors emerge from the forest, their rifles trained on Marcus and his men. Standing Bear, a tall man with gray-streaked hair and a face like weathered stone, walked forward to stand beside Ben. This woman is under the protection of both the mountain man and my people, Standing Bear said in careful English. You are on our land without permission, threatening those we call friends. Leave now, and we will let you go in peace. Stay, and your bones will feed the wolves. Marcus looked between Ben, Josephine, and the Shoshone warriors, calculation in his eyes. He was outnumbered and outmaneuvered, and he knew it. This is not over, he said to Josephine. You are still my wife by law. I can make your life very difficult. Then do your worst, Josephine replied. But do it from Salt Lake City, because I am never coming back there. You can tell the courts I abandoned you. You can divorce me and claim I was an unfit wife. You can spread whatever lies you want about me. None of it matters, because I am finally free of you. For just a moment, Marcus's carefully controlled mask slipped, and Josephine saw the fury and wounded pride beneath. But he was too much of a pragmatist to throw his life away over a woman who clearly despised him. You will regret this, he said coldly. Both of you. He wheeled his horse around and rode back down the mountain, his men scrambling to follow. The group watched them go, no one lowering their weapons until the riders had disappeared into the trees. Only then did Josephine release the breath she had been holding. Her hands began to shake, the adrenaline draining away all at once. Ben caught her as her knees buckled, pulling her against his chest. It is over, he murmured into her hair. You did it. You stood up to him and you won. Josephine clutched his shirt, grounding herself in his solid presence. We won. If you and Standing Bear had not been here. But we were here, Ben assured her, and we always will be. Standing Bear approached, a slight smile on his weathered face. Your woman has the heart of a warrior, Ben. She did not flinch. I was terrified, Josephine admitted, pulling back from Ben but staying close to his side. Thank you, Standing Bear. I do not know what we would have done without your help. The Shoshone chief shrugged. Ben has been a good neighbor to our people. He respects our land and our ways. When we saw the group of armed white men heading up the mountain, we knew they meant trouble. We have been watching from the trees for the past hour, waiting to see if our intervention would be needed. It was needed and appreciated, Ben said, clasping the chief's arm in the traditional greeting. I owe you a debt. No debt between friends. But perhaps you will come to our spring gathering next month, you and your woman. It is time she met the others who live in these mountains. We will be there, Ben promised. After the Shoshone warriors departed, Ben and Josephine returned to the cabin. Inside, Josephine finally allowed herself to collapse onto the bed, her whole body shaking with relief. He is really gone, she said wonderingly. I stood there and told him no, and he left. Ben sat beside her, pulling her into his lap. You were magnificent, brave and strong, and absolutely magnificent. I was scared out of my mind. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite the fear. And you, my love, have more courage than anyone I have ever met. Josephine wrapped her arms around his neck, holding him close. I meant what I said out there. This is my home now. Our home. I do not care what Marcus does, what lies he tells, what legal troubles he tries to cause. I am staying here with you. Even though it means a hard life, even though it means isolation and danger and none of the comforts you grew up with. Especially because of those things. Do you know what I realized out there, facing Marcus? I realized that I would rather have 1 year of real life with you in these mountains than 100 years of false security in Salt Lake City. I would rather chop wood and haul water and fight for survival than sit in a gilded parlor being slowly crushed by expectations and fear. Ben cupped her face in his large, calloused hands. Then stay. Stay and build a life with me. We will expand the cabin, make it a real home. We will plant a garden in the spring, maybe get some chickens. We will make it through the good times and the bad together. Together, Josephine agreed. Always together. They made love then, a fierce and passionate claiming that was as much about celebrating their freedom as it was about expressing their love. And afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, they began to plan their future in earnest. Over the following weeks, word filtered back through the few traders and trappers who passed through the mountains that Marcus Porter had indeed filed for divorce, citing abandonment and adultery. He had also spread the story that Josephine had been mentally unstable, that her flight had been the act of a disturbed woman. But to Josephine's surprise, the scandal affected Marcus more than it might have otherwise. Apparently, being unable to keep his wife under control damaged his reputation among Salt Lake City's elite. Within 6 months, his business partners had distanced themselves, and several of his mining investments had failed. Karma, Josephine said with satisfaction when Ben brought her the news from a passing trapper. He finally faced consequences for his actions. Does it bother you, Ben asked, that he is painting you as unstable? Josephine considered the question. It would have once. But the opinions of Salt Lake City society mean nothing to me now. The people whose opinions I care about know the truth. She smiled at him. And that is you, Standing Bear, and the others in our mountain community. That is enough. As spring turned to summer, Ben and Josephine worked to expand the cabin, adding a second room and a proper kitchen area. Standing Bear's people helped with the heavy work, and in return, Ben and Josephine shared their supplies and knowledge. It became a true partnership, with Josephine learning the healing arts from the Shoshone women and teaching some of them to read and write English. Life in the mountains was hard, but it was also deeply fulfilling. Josephine found that she thrived on the physical work, on the sense of accomplishment that came from building something with her own hands. And every night, she fell asleep in Ben's strong arms, safe and loved and free. In July, Ben asked her to marry him properly. They were sitting by a mountain stream, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. He had fashioned a ring from silver ore he had found, polishing it to a shine. I know you are already free of Marcus in your heart, he said, slipping the ring onto her finger. But I want you to be free in law as well. The divorce will be final soon, and when it is, I want to marry you. Not because I need a legal claim to you, but because I want the world to know that you chose me. And I chose you. Josephine looked at the simple ring on her finger, more beautiful to her than the expensive bauble Marcus had given her. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I will marry you, Ben, though I chose you months ago, when you stood between me and danger and asked nothing in return. They were married in September of 1879, in a ceremony that blended white and Shoshone traditions. Standing Bear officiated, and the entire tribe attended, along with the handful of trappers and mountain men who called this region home. Josephine wore a dress made of soft deerskin, decorated with beadwork that the Shoshone women had created for her. Ben wore his best buckskins and had trimmed his beard for the occasion, though his hair still fell past his shoulders. As they spoke their vows under the open sky, with the mountains rising around them and the wind carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers, Josephine felt a happiness so complete it almost frightened her. She had come to these mountains to escape death, and instead, she had found life. Real, vibrant, challenging life. The first winter of their marriage was hard, with heavy snows and temperatures that plunged well below zero. But inside their expanded cabin, with a good store of supplies and each other for warmth and company, Ben and Josephine not only survived but thrived. They read together, told stories, made plans for the spring, and they loved each other with a passion that only deepened as they faced challenges together. In March of 1880, Josephine discovered she was pregnant. She told Ben one evening as they sat by the fire, placing his large hand on her still flat belly. "We are going to have a baby," she said, watching his face carefully. "In the fall, around October." Ben's expression cycled through surprise, joy, and then fear. A baby. Here? Josephine, Childbirth is dangerous even in cities with doctors. Out here, with just us and whatever help we can get from Standing Bear's people. I know the risks, Josephine said calmly, but I also know that women have been having babies in much more difficult circumstances since the beginning of time. The Shoshone women have promised to help when the time comes. They have far more experience with this than any city doctor. Ben pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. I am terrified, he admitted. The thought of something happening to you, of losing you. Nothing is going to happen to me. I am strong, Ben. You made me strong. And we are going to bring a child into this world, a child who will grow up knowing nothing but love and freedom. Over the following months, Ben became almost comically protective. He insisted on doing all the heavy work, would not let Josephine climb or do anything he deemed remotely dangerous. She tolerated it with good humor, knowing his fear came from love, but she also put her foot down when he tried to wrap her in cotton wool. I am pregnant, not broken, she told him firmly, after he tried to carry her across a stream she could have easily waded through. And our child will need a mother who is strong and capable, not one who has been coddled into helplessness. Ben backed off, though he continued to hover. And in truth, Josephine appreciated his care, even if she teased him about it. As her belly grew and the baby's movements became more pronounced, she found herself grateful for his steady presence, for his willingness to rub her aching back and fetch her water in the middle of the night. In early October, Josephine went into labor. It was a long, difficult process that tested every ounce of her strength. The Shoshone women came as promised, bringing herbs and knowledge passed down through generations. Ben stayed by her side through it all, letting her squeeze his hand until his bones ached, murmuring encouragement and love. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy boy with a powerful set of lungs, Ben wept openly. He held his son with shaking hands, marveling at the tiny, perfect fingers and the shock of dark hair. He is beautiful, he breathed. Josephine, he is perfect. Josephine, exhausted but exhilarated, smiled up at her husband. What should we name him? They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, debating various options. But in that moment, only one name felt right. Freedom, Ben said. His name is Freedom, because that is what you came here seeking, and that is what we have built together. And he will grow up knowing that he can choose his own path, whatever that may be. Josephine reached out to touch her son's cheek. Freedom Davies, I love it. It is perfect. The first months of Freedom's life were challenging, as all new parents discover. But Ben took to fatherhood with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. He fashioned a cradle from cedar wood, carved with protective symbols taught to him by Standing Bear. He woke for nighttime feedings, walking the floor with his son when Josephine needed rest. And he watched with wonder as the tiny infant grew and changed with each passing day. Freedom proved to be a strong, healthy baby, and by his first birthday in October of 1881, he was already walking and getting into everything. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's curiosity, a combination that promised future adventures and probable heart attacks for his parents. Life settled into a new rhythm. The cabin, once a bachelor's refuge, became a true family home. Josephine taught Freedom his letters as soon as he could focus on them. Ben taught him to track animals and identify plants. Standing Bear's people adopted the boy as one of their own, and he grew up speaking both English and Shoshone with equal fluency. In the spring of 1883, Josephine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Liberty. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's solid build, and from the moment she could crawl, she followed her older brother everywhere. Ben looked at his growing family with a sense of gratitude that sometimes overwhelmed him. This man, who had come to the mountains to escape humanity, had found something he had not known he was missing: love, family, purpose. Do you ever regret it? He asked Josephine one evening as they watched their children play near the cabin. Freedom was teaching Liberty to catch grasshoppers, both of them shrieking with laughter. Giving up your old life for this one? Josephine leaned against his solid warmth, content. Not for a single second. That was not living, Ben. It was existing, surviving. This is living. The hard work, the challenges, the joy of raising our children in freedom. This is everything I ever wanted, even when I did not know enough to want it. You saved my life, you know, Ben said softly. When you stumbled into my mountains, half frozen and wholly desperate, you reminded me what it meant to care about someone, to let someone in. I was not living either, not really. I was just hiding. Then we saved each other, Josephine replied. She turned to kiss him, a soft press of lips that still made her heart race even after years together. And we built something beautiful from our broken pieces. As the years passed, Ben and Josephine's family grew both in size and in reputation. They had 2 more children, twin boys born in 1886 and named Justice and True. The cabin expanded again to accommodate the growing family, becoming a sprawling homestead rather than a simple trapper's dwelling. Their home became known as a safe haven for those fleeing bad situations. More than once, Ben found runaway women or escaped slaves or people fleeing persecution at his door, seeking the same sanctuary Josephine had found. He and Josephine never turned anyone away. They would offer food, shelter, and help to get people where they needed to go, whether that was deeper into the mountains, to Canada, or to California. We are not heroes," Josephine said once, after helping a young woman escape an abusive father. "We are just doing what anyone with a conscience should do." But to those they helped, they were heroes. And slowly, Ben and Josephine Davies became something of a legend in the territory. The mountain man and his wife who took in strays and stood against those who would abuse their power. Freedom grew into a young man who embodied his name, strong and independent like his father, but with his mother's compassion and intelligence. Liberty became a skilled healer, learning from both her mother and the Shoshone women. And the twins, Justice and True, were as inseparable as their names suggested, 2 halves of a whole who seemed to communicate without words. On their 15th wedding anniversary, in September of 1894, Ben and Josephine stood on the ridge above their homestead, looking out over the valley they had made their own. Their children were grown now, or nearly so, building their own lives while remaining close to home. "Did you ever imagine this?" Josephine asked, her hand in Ben's. At 40, she had lines around her eyes and silver threads in her dark hair, but to Ben, she had never been more beautiful. "That night when you found me in the snow, did you ever imagine we would build all this?" "Not even in my wildest dreams," Ben admitted. His own hair had gone mostly gray, and his body bore the aches and pains of years of hard physical labor. But his eyes were still that startling blue, and his love for the woman beside him had never wavered. "I thought I was saving one woman. I did not realize she would save me right back. And I certainly did not imagine we would create a whole new world up here in these mountains." "It is a good world," Josephine said. "Hard but good, honest and real." "Just like you," Ben replied, pulling her close. "Hard and good and real." They stood there as the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, and thought about the night they had met. A desperate woman fleeing into the cold, willing to die rather than go back to a life that was killing her slowly. A lonely man who had forgotten what it meant to care, and a single act of kindness that had changed both their lives forever. "I would rather die in the cold than go back," Josephine said softly, echoing her words from that long-ago night. "That is what I told you." "And I told you that you would never go back again," Ben finished, "and you never did. You only went forward into a life you built with your own hands." "We built it together," Josephine corrected. "Everything we have, everything we are, we built it together." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, they made their way back down to the homestead, to the warm cabin and the family waiting inside, to the life they had carved from the wilderness and the love that had sustained them through everything. And if sometimes, in the deep of winter, when the wind howled and the snow piled high, they thought back to that desperate night when everything had changed, they did so with gratitude. Gratitude for the cold that had driven them together, for the mountains that had sheltered them, and for the courage it took to choose life over mere survival. Their story became part of the legends of the territory, passed down through generations. The mountain man and his brave wife, who had stood against injustice and built a haven in the wilderness, who had shown that love could flourish even in the harshest conditions and that true freedom was worth any price. As Ben and Josephine grew older, they watched with pride as their children built their own lives. Freedom married a Shoshone woman and became a skilled guide, helping settlers navigate the mountain passes safely. Liberty opened a small clinic in a growing mountain town, bringing her healing skills to those who needed them. Justice and True went into law enforcement, determined to protect those who could not protect themselves. And through it all, Ben and Josephine remained the heart of their family, the example of what true partnership looked like. They still worked side by side every day, their movements synchronized by years of practice. They still sat by the fire in the evenings, reading or talking, or simply enjoying the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other completely. In the summer of 1902, as they approached their 24th anniversary, Standing Bear came to visit. He was very old now, his face a map of wrinkles, but his eyes were still sharp and knowing. "You have done well, old friend," he said to Ben as they sat on the porch, watching the grandchildren play in the yard. Josephine sat beside them, her hand resting on Ben's knee. "When I first met you, you were a wounded man hiding from the world. Now look at you. You have a family, a legacy, a life filled with purpose." "I owe much of that to you," Ben replied. "Your friendship, your help, your wisdom. You taught me that strength is not about standing alone, but about knowing when to accept help and offer it in return." Standing Bear shook his head. "I simply reminded you of what you already knew. The credit belongs to you and to this brave woman who chose to build a life in the wilderness rather than accept captivity and comfort." Josephine smiled. "It was not as difficult a choice as you might think. When the alternative is losing yourself, even the hardest path becomes the only path." As the afternoon wore on, they told stories of the old days, of the night Ben had found Josephine in the snow, of Standing Bear's intervention when Marcus Porter had come calling, of all the adventures and challenges they had faced together. The grandchildren listened with wide eyes, never tiring of the stories even though they had heard them countless times before. That night, after Standing Bear had gone and the children had all settled down to sleep, Ben and Josephine lay in their bed, wrapped in each other's arms as they had been for nearly a quarter century. "Do you know what I think about sometimes?" Josephine murmured. "I think about the girl I was before I met you. The one who was so afraid, so lost, so certain that the world held nothing for her but pain. And I want to go back and tell her that she is wrong, that she's going to find something so much better than she ever imagined." "What would you tell her?" Ben asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I would tell her to be brave, to take that first step into the cold, even though it is terrifying, to trust that sometimes the scariest choice is the right choice, and I would tell her that she is going to meet a man with kind eyes and strong hands who will show her what love really means." Ben kissed the top of her head. "I would tell that angry, lonely man I was that his life is about to get a lot more complicated and a lot more wonderful, that a woman is going to stumble into his mountains and turn his whole world upside down, and that it will be the best thing that ever happens to him." They fell asleep that way, holding each other close, their heartbeats synchronized after so many years together. And in the morning, they woke to another day of work and laughter and love, another day of the life they had chosen and fought for and built with their own hands. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growing family. Ben and Josephine became great-grandparents, their line extending far beyond what either of them had imagined. The homestead became a gathering place, especially during holidays, with 3 generations coming together to celebrate and share stories. On a crisp October morning in 1910, Ben and Josephine celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary. They were both in their 70s now, their bodies bearing the marks of a life lived fully and physically. But their love had not diminished with age. If anything, it had deepened, becoming something both comfortable and profound. They took a walk that morning, as they did most mornings when weather permitted, following familiar trails through the forest. The mountains had changed over the decades, with more settlers and even a railroad passing through the valley below. But up here, in their corner of the wilderness, things remained largely as they had always been. "Do you ever miss the modern world?" Ben asked as they rested on a fallen log, looking out over the vista they both loved. "There are automobiles now, electric lights, all manner of conveniences." Josephine laughed. "I do not miss what I never wanted in the first place. Our life may seem primitive to outsiders, but it has everything I need. Clean air, honest work, family, and you. What more could anyone want? Nothing, Ben agreed. Nothing at all. They sat in comfortable silence, watching a hawk circle overhead. After a while, Josephine spoke again. Ben, when the time comes when one of us goes before the other, I want you to promise me something. Ben stiffened. Do not talk about that. We have to talk about it. We are not young anymore. She took his hand, squeezing gently. I want you to promise me that if I go first, you will not retreat back into solitude. Stay with the family. Let them care for you. And know that I will be waiting for you, wherever we go next. And if I go first, then I will do the same. I will stay strong for our children and grandchildren. I will continue the work we have built together, and I will count the days until I can see you again. She leaned her head on his shoulder. But I hope we have many more years yet. I am not done with you, Benjamin Davies. Good, he replied, wrapping his arm around her, because I am not done with you either, Josephine Davies. They remained on the mountain well into their 80s, stubbornly independent, even as their children urged them to move to the larger cabin Freedom had built closer to town. But the original homestead was where they belonged, where their story had begun, and where they wanted it to end. One winter morning in 1918, after a light snowfall that reminded them both of that long-ago night when they had first met, Ben did not wake up. He passed peacefully in his sleep, with Josephine in his arms as he had been for 40 years. Josephine mourned him deeply, but she also celebrated a life well lived and a love that had never faltered. She gathered their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren around her and told them stories of their grandfather, of his strength and kindness and the way he had saved her life in every way that mattered. He was a good man, she said, the best man I ever knew, and every day I spent with him was a gift. She lived for 2 more years, remaining in the cabin they had shared, tended by her devoted family. And on a clear night in October of 1920, exactly 42 years after the night Ben had found her in the snow, Josephine passed away in her sleep, a smile on her face, as if she was seeing something wonderful. They buried her beside Ben on the ridge above the homestead, under a stone that read, Josephine Davies. She chose freedom over safety, love over comfort, and a full life over a long one. Beloved wife, mother, and friend. Their story did not end with their deaths. It lived on in their descendants, in the values they had instilled and the example they had set. It lived on in the homestead, which remained in the family and became a historical site, teaching future generations about the courage it took to forge a new life in the wilderness. And it lived on in the hearts of everyone who heard their tale. The mountain man and his brave wife, who had proven that love could overcome any obstacle, that freedom was worth any price, and that sometimes the coldest night leads to the warmest home. When people visited the graves on the ridge, they often remarked on how peaceful the spot was, how the wind seemed to whisper through the pines like a love song. And sometimes, on winter nights when the snow fell soft and silent, people swore they could see 2 figures walking hand in hand through the forest, a tall man with broad shoulders and a woman with dark hair, forever together in the mountains they had made their own. The words Josephine had cried that desperate night echoed through time. I would rather die in the cold than go back, and Ben's answering promise remained true beyond death itself. She will never go back again. Their love story became a testament to the power of choice, of courage, of 2 broken souls finding wholeness in each other. It showed that true partnership meant standing together against any threat, building something beautiful from nothing, and never giving up on the dream of a better life. And in the end, that was their legacy. Not just the children and grandchildren who carried their blood, not just the homestead that stood as a monument to their determination, but the simple truth that love, real love, was worth fighting for. That freedom was not just the absence of chains, but the presence of choice, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was to walk away from what they knew and trust that something better waited in the unknown. Ben and Josephine Davies had done that. They had chosen each other, chosen freedom, chosen a hard but honest life in the mountains. And in doing so, they had created something that lasted far beyond their mortal years. A story of love triumphant, of courage rewarded, of 2 people who had declared they would rather die than live without each other. and who had instead found a way to truly live together until their very last days. Their descendants continued to gather at the homestead every year on the anniversary of that night when everything had changed. They would stand on the ridge where Ben and Josephine were buried and tell the story once more, ensuring that future generations would know about the mountain man and his brave wife, and the love that had started with a desperate cry in the cold and had grown into something eternal. The mountains stood witness to it all, unchanging and eternal, keeping the secrets and stories of all who had made them home. And somewhere in the wind that whispered through the pines, in the snow that fell soft and silent on winter nights, Ben and Josephine's love continued on, a testament to the truth that real love never dies. It simply changes form, becoming part of the land and the legacy, forever woven into the story of the wild places where brave souls dared to build their dreams.